What's up, everybody? This is Frank from Fam Sports New York, and for this video we're going to be doing our Week 1 preview for Section 1B, 1C, and D and the Hudson Valley Football League. I want to welcome our audience to the video. Appreciate you guys as always. I know in the past that we've kind of done separate videos for each class, but have to consolidate some of the stuff together. Kind of doing a big school with 1A, 1AA, and then for the smaller school ones. And it just helps us push out the content that we want to push out at a more convenient rate. This is also kind of a second job for us, as we love giving you guys content. We believe we provide good content coverage for the athletes and for the school programs that complement guys like Low Hud and Kevin Devaney and stuff like that. But this is our second job, so personal things, professional things make it a little bit difficult at times, and we appreciate your understanding. But how it's going to work, guys, and also one final thing too is our Patreon. I know people have asked about it. Our Patreon members, they get our week reviews. So at the end of the week, we kind of break down what we saw on a video that goes for about 20 to 30 minutes. We put that out there. We also do our team rankings based on what tier of Patreon you choose. You can get access to our team rankings per class. And as the season goes along, we'll also be adding offensive line, offense and defense rankings. So consider joining that if you guys want to do that. But let's dive into it. I'm going to go over some of the games, or all the games from each class that are being played. We're going to be previewing about 5 of them between all the classes, and then we're going to pick all the games. So we are going to address every single one of them. And obviously, missing my partner, Mars is not here for this week, but he will be making his return from some professional and personal things. He couldn't make it this time, but he will be around, so we will have our normal duo at some point. But let's go into it, guys. From the 1B side, we have Ardsley at Nyack, Edgemont at Pearl River, Albertus Magnus at Putt Valley, Lakeland at Rye, which can be seen on Local Live. We have Pleasantville at Byram Hills, which is also on Local Live, which is a rematch of the Section 1B title game. We have Hen Hut at Croton Harmon. We have Briarcliff Hamilton Football Program at Irvington, which can be seen on Local Live. We have Sleepy Hollow at Nanuet and Hastings at Rhinebeck. And on the C and D side, we know about Blindbrook being canceled, which kind of screwed things up. But we have Tuckahoe at Bronxville, which can be which is going to be viewed on Local Live as well. We have Woodlands at Dobbs Ferry. We have Valhalla at Westlake, so I don't think Haldane has a game this week. I didn't see it on the schedule. The Hudson Valley Football League also. We have Walter Panis at Portchester, which can be seen on Local Live. We have Spring Valley at Peekskill, which also can be seen on Local Live. And Tappan Zee at Ramapo. Local Live is definitely a huge asset for high school football fans like myself. So let's go over a couple of the biggest matchups, and then we're going to pick all the games. And the first one I want to talk about is the B matchup, Ardsley at Nyack. That's going to be a huge one. 1-0 Ardsley is at 0-0 Nyack. They have not played each other since, maybe the historians could tell me, but since Max Preps has been around, which is 2004, they have not played. And let's start with Ardsley. Offensively, I think Ben Silverman is such a big part of this offense. Had over 100 yards last week, 115 yards and a touchdown. Mike Rendy, they didn't ask him to throw it a lot, but again, he was 2 for 2, had a touchdown. They were really running the ball efficiently. They had Dulcine had 51 yards. Paley had another 31 yards. Running the football behind the offensive line was huge for them. And they had, I think it was, 4 rushing touchdowns, right? Anthony Chenard had a receiving touchdown. So running the ball was huge for them last week. That's what I think is going to be the biggest thing for them, is control the ball, play action out of it against this Nyack team that has a lot of speed. So I don't think slinging the ball all around the place is going to be helpful for them. I think running the ball with the guys up front is going to be huge. And that's with guys Sanfilippo up front on the offensive line, help leading that charge, and then hitting some big plays to guys like Anthony Chenard. But running the ball is going to be absolutely big for them. Defensively, again, they're up against a lot of speed. Nyack has a lot of speed, but what they do need to kind of address or establish is up front in the trenches. And so they could, Ardsley might have an opportunity here to create some big negative plays up on that defensive line with guys like Speckman. Can they, again, they have to get after a very talented quarterback, transfer quarterback coming in, a lot of speed on the outside. If this gets into an East and West game or a track meet, that bodes well for Nyack. So for me, Ardsley wants to keep all the big plays in front of them. Don't allow any big plays. Keep the ball in front and try to generate some pressures up front with that defensive line. I think is going to be extremely important. On the Nyack side, this is a team I think could be very surprising. They are at home, which obviously is a big benefit to them, playing the B schools, bringing back a lot of talent. But the question is, again, up front, right? That's kind of the big thing that Coach emphasizes. They got to establish themselves in the trenches. They have the skill guys, and it starts with their quarterback in Tylen Blackwell-Williams, the junior transfer. This kid's 6 feet, 195 pounds, well-built kid. This is a guy who could really explode this year, especially in the B class, which is filled with quarterbacks. He could be one of the big ones. And Sean Claremont is another guy. He had over 400 yards last year. That kind of duo between those two guys, running the ball and then Tylen throwing the ball, could be a deadly combo. But I'm looking at guys up front, Darius Valdez. If they're going to win this game, they're going to have a strong performance by the offensive line. Him helping lead that charge is going to be huge. Defensively, stopping the run is going to be the number one thing. They have another young player who's also very talented, Mateo Massey, the outside linebacker, a 6'3" kid. These linebackers got to slow down their running game first. You saw multiple backs from Ardsley carry the ball. We have Silverman, who had over 100 yards. Stopping the run is going to be number one important. If they can get them in second and third and long, and they have their DB like Ray Booten, who can really attack the football, cause some turnovers, Nyack could be in good shape. The more possessions they have, the more ability they can hit some big plays. That's going to be the big emphasis for Nyack. And the matchup I'm looking for, this Ardsley offensive line versus defensive front seven of Nyack. Ardsley ran the ball very well last week. Can they continue to do that against the speedy Nyack defense? All right, guys, let's go to the next matchup I want to talk about. And this is a CD matchup, and this is Tuckahoe, 1-0 at Bronxville, who's 1-0. Really interesting matchup right here against two very talented teams. And let's start with Tuckahoe. Offensively, their quarterback, Jax Colicho, was really efficient last week. 9-12, 132 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he was spreading the ball out. And he had three different receivers had a receiving touchdown. They also were able to run the ball, and that was kind of the big thing. They were missing so many skill guys who was going to step up. Last week, you saw guys like, again, Snyder, Bryce, Banky, Declan Connolly, right, is another guy. So, again, efficiency is going to be the big thing with them, and the balance that they can show. Efficiency and balance was really important. It's going to happen again this week against another bigger opponent in Bronxville who's pretty large up front, right? So, when I look at defensively, what they really benefited was turnovers. They forced 4 turnovers last week. Their defensive line and Chris and Anthony Bartolini, Serlo is going to be so big, right? They're going up against a big offensive line in Bronxville. These guys on the defensive front are going to have to cause some havoc. It's going to be extremely important for them to generate pressure. And a guy like Connor Benke, who's got to be running sideline to sideline. Again, play action was big for Bronxville last week. He's got to be very smart at the linebacker spot, when to read run, when to read pass. That play action is going to be huge. And Matt Gorderi had 8 tackles last week, is another guy to keep an eye on that defense, who made some plays for them. When I look at Bronxville, they won versus Chester last week, 28-0. Offensively, Connor Kenny, he had a couple touchdown passes. Play action, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, was very strong for Bronxville. Look for them to key on that. But it all starts with running the football, right? Davis Patterson had a long touchdown run. When you can establish the run game, then you can get that play action. I thought the offensive line was very strong for Bronxville. But it impressed me the most, and what could really propel Bronxville to compete for a title is defense, right? They shut out Chester last week. Gabe Micon, the defensive end, had a very strong performance. This defensive line going up against Tuckahoe, which has some depth up front on that offensive and defensive line. That's one of the biggest matchups for this game, right? Bronxville has a lot of size. Tuckahoe has some good depth. Who's going to win that battle, right, between the two? And these DBs, you got Charlie Donahue is another guy. When you look at Tuckahoe, Jax Colichicho was very efficient, right? So these DBs are going to have to be sticking to these receivers, and he spread the ball around last week. Does he do the same thing again? This defensive back group is going to be they're going to be tested. They're going to be tested. The matchup I'm looking for, I mentioned it a little earlier. This Tuckahoe defensive line versus this Bronxville offensive line. If you're a guy who loves trenches, this is going to be a fun one to watch, right? I mentioned the Tuckahoe defensive line has some guys and some depth, and the Bronxville offensive line has size. So that's going to be a really fun matchup to watch in this one. Let's go to an A matchup for our next game that I want to preview. Lakeland 1-0 at Rye, who's 0-1. Rye is 3-0 versus Lakeland. Last time they played, they won 35-0 last year. But let's start with Lakeland. They had a really big win against their rival last week. They won 43-14 at Walter Panis. And now offensively, it all starts with their quarterback first. Grady Leonard, he was really good. 11-12, had over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns passing. He also had 49 yards rushing and a touchdown. This is a dual threat kid. And again, he's a game breaker, right? He's a guy who can really put so much pressure on your defense, both with his arm, which is very strong, but his legs as well. So you have to be smart. I'm imagining Lakeland they're going to have to utilize both. It's going to be so important. And one guy to keep in mind is Sean Perry. So Rye did give up a couple long touchdown passes, one of 30 yards, I think both about 30 plus yards last week. Sean Perry had a very strong performance. He's a real good slot receiver, 135 yards in a touchdown last week. Kyle Gallagher is another guy on the outside who can make some big plays. He had a receiving touchdown and a punt return touchdown. But to me, what was so surprising, and a lot of kudos got to go to this offensive line, they also rushed for over 130 yards as well. So Robbie Policastro had 130 yards rushing, plus that with Grady Leonard. You saw a good amount of rushing yards, and this offensive line really held up. And now can they do it again against probably what's going to be a bigger defensive front in Rye, right? That's going to be a huge question. Defensively, guys like Anthony Ferroni had 2 sacks last week, and Rye really struggled to run the ball. So I'm interested to see, can Lakeland's defense, which is not overly big, but I think bigger than last year, and obviously they're trying to replace some veteran linebackers. You know, they gave up a long touchdown run last week to Walter Panis. But they held up relatively well after that. In the beginning, they gave that long run. After that, they held up pretty strong. But again, you're playing against a bigger front in Rye this week. So interested to see how this defense can, again, stop the run, number one, and generate pressure on their stud quarterback is going to be key. When I look at Rye, I mean, you had a very tough loss last week against their rivals, but it's time to move, right? Now you're getting into league play in your league. That was a non-league game for Rye. I'm interested to see how they rebound. I think they're going to be very focused this week. And this offense, listen, they did move the ball. They just couldn't finish, right? They had over 300 yards last week, but 2 turnovers killed them. A couple 4th down stops they didn't get killed them. They had an opportunity to win the game. And what was interesting and different about Rye from their normal formula, which they're usually very balanced, only had 80 yards rushing, right? So they had over 300 yards, but only 80 of that was on the ground. They need to find some efficiency running the football. And I know Chris Luliano, he had 45 yards rushing, good-sized kid, but a mixture of him and the offensive line needing to stay on blocks longer is going to be very key here. They need to get back to running the ball efficiently, which takes some of the pressure off A.J. Miller, who was very efficient at 17 and 22 last week at 230 yards, had a passing touchdown, also had a running touchdown. He used his legs as well. He did miss some throws that I know I've seen him make in the past, had an INT, but he had a gritty performance, and they had a tough time running the ball. He really had to carry the offense there. But if you can run the ball efficiently now, getting the ball to guys like Kesner, Griffiths, the other receiver, that's Asavadi, excuse me. He was running the name was slipping my mind, but he had a really strong performance as well. Now these receivers can really make plays, and they can do play action out of it, which I think A.J. Miller is at his best with it. But again, that's going to be the big thing. Establishing the run, play action out of that, getting the snaps ready, right? So it was a tough time snapping last week. How do they fix that things? I think they're going to be much more focused this week. Defensively, they only gave up 2 touchdowns last week on the offensive side. And one of them was the pick 6, right? So they had only 2 offensive touchdowns they gave up last week. Rye was a very bend but don't break type of defense. They give up a couple long passing touchdowns like I mentioned. But I'm interested to see about Swarak. He's such an important part of that defensive line and left the game early last week. He's so big for them. But you have Welburn, who had 8 tackles. Gonzalez had 7 tackles. You have still guys who can make some big plays for you. Kessner, as an outside linebacker, had a sack. I think this defense, again, if they like to generate a lot of pressure, they like to force the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly, and they will leave their DBs on an island. So if they don't get home, that's where bad things can happen, and Grady Leonard can really hurt you. They have to make sure they keep Grady Leonard in the pocket. Is going to be vital for them. They got to force him to throw within the pocket, and then try to generate pressure with their front four is going to be huge. The matchup I'm looking at is these Rye wide receivers who are very talented. Wide receiver and tight ends versus these Lakeland linebackers and DBs, and that's going to be such an interesting matchup. I know everyone loves talking offense, and we have Lakeland's quarterback and their receivers and Rye's quarterback and their receivers. I'm looking to see some of Lakeland's back-end defense, how they hold up. All right, guys, let's go to the fourth game. This is a C matchup. Valhalla, who's 1-0 at Westlake, who's 0-0. This is one of the big matchups here on C. This is happening on 9/11. This is a Monday night game. And when you look at Westlake is 7-1 versus Valhalla. They have won 4 straight. And the last 3 matchups, they've won by over 19 points, right? So Westlake has kind of had the number in this game recently. But let's start with Valhalla. They had a very impressive win last week. They won 51-7 at Rye-Neck. Offensively, their running back, Rob Foysett, he had 3 rushing touchdowns. Luke Foysett had 2 rushing touchdowns. And they hit some big plays off of play action. So they were running the ball very well. The offensive line had some good size to it. Play action with Brendan O'Neill. He had a nice passing touchdown. Also set up some other running touchdowns with some throws. Tyler Ratty had the receiving touchdown. So this offense showed some nice balance last week. But to me, it always starts with running the football. And Westlake, again, I think has a speed advantage. But Valhalla does have some good size, so when they can run north and south is going to be really important. Defensively, they forced 3+ turnovers, a bunch of fumble recoveries last week. They were strong versus the run. They have some good size up front. How are they going to hold up against this Westlake speed is going to be so important for Valhalla. They can really get on the edge very quickly. They also do some play action stuff out of it. This is 2 running teams mixing in with some of the play action. Going to be interested to see how these offenses operate this upcoming game. And for Westlake, listen, they didn't play a game last week, but the offense starts in the run game for me. I know Coach talked about being much more balanced. I think it's going to be an emphasis, but these guys have multiple backs who can really burn you once they get to the second level, guys like Chris Calley. But their quarterback, multiple-year starter in Pagan, they're very excited about the work he has put in. You could see a big jump this year from him going into his final year, and they have to replace a couple offensive linemen, right? So they do have to replace a couple of guys up front. Interested to see, again, who takes over those positions, who steps up, but balance is going to be key for them. I do think they have a couple guys, if they can get out on the edge, can make some big plays, and their quarterback off of play action, I think can really be beneficial to them. On the defense, we know they got playmakers at each level coming back. You got Mealy on the defensive line, Castellano linebacker spot, defensive back, you got DiNapoli, right? So you have guys coming back at each level, and there's even more I didn't even mention. So this is going to be a veteran group on the defense. They're going to fly to the football. I think it's going to be difficult for Valhalla to move the ball consistently, but Westlake have to be disciplined, right? You can't just fall. The play action stuff could hurt them at times. How do they hold up strength-wise? I think they have the talent to. Interested to see how they execute on defense. Now, the matchup, I'm looking at this Valhalla run game that was really strong last week versus the Westlake defensive line and linebackers who were bringing back veteran talent. Going to be very interesting. All right, guys, my final game to break down. My game of the week out of this group has got to be the rematch in B for the section title game. Pleasantville 0-0 at Byram Hills, who's 1-0. Again, I mentioned rematch for this title game. Pleasantville's 3-2 versus Byram Hills the last 5 meetings. They have won 2 straight, but these last 2 games, they won by 7 in the championship, won by 3 the previous game. This has been very close. This has been a very fun rivalry to watch between the 2 teams. Let's start with Pleasantville. Offensively, we know about Daniel Picard, right? Everyone knows about him at this point. I imagine they're going to utilize him in the backfield, utilize him out as a wide receiver. Getting him out on the edge is where he's the most dangerous, right? So running outside the tackle box, stretching defenses, and allowing him to cut and do what he does best. And I imagine you're going to see plenty of that. But who has impressed me this summer and when I went to go see at camp is Aiden Picard. I thought he was very... And again, this is just camp and scrimmages, I get that. And you saw at times last year this. We got to see now in real life consistently. And he was very decisive. He was accurate. He had very strong control of the offense. And getting it to some of his talented receivers like Eric Coleman, right, is going to be so important to create some balance here. And it's not just handed to Daniel Picard. They are going to give it to him plenty of times, which I would as well. But it's not just him getting the football, right? It's so important to have some of that balance, some of that big playability. And he could do that with guys like Eric Coleman. And look for some other backs to step in. Louis Sadal, Ryan Horrigan. There's some other guys who can also carry the ball a little bit too, so you can move Daniel out to the wide receiver spot. So very interested there. But the O-line, they have a lot of offensive linemen they got to replace. who is the guys that are going to step up front? And that's where you could see some rust in this offense, trying to get this offensive line established. So definitely keep an eye on that. Defensively, we know this is aggressive style defense, like to blitz their linebackers a lot. They're going to try to generate a lot of pressure with Byram Hills. It all starts to me with these DBs off of play action, right? They have to be aware of the backs coming out of the backfield on pass and the play action, some big play opportunities if the blitz doesn't get home. So these DBs will be pressured, but this is a veteran defensive back and linebacking core. So I'm very interested. Pleasantville has the talent. We know about Horgan. We know about Hudzinski, two cornerstones of this defense. Some of the other guys who could step up is going to be huge. Like, who are they going to be? Is a guy like McPhee, right, on the outside linebacker? Who's it up on the defensive line? Is it Fitzy, right? So we're going to see what's going to go on with the defense, who steps up outside of those two cornerstone pieces, but they have some of those talented guys coming back, which I'm excited to see. For Byram Hills, very strong performance last week. They went up 21-0 at half, ended up winning 28-0 at Brian Cliff Hamilton football program. Offensively, really strong in the pass attack last week. Quarterback John Accurso had 221 yards passing in the touchdown, also had a rushing touchdown. He's so important for this offense, and so is his he's Batman, and then there's a Robin, which is Luke Weiler, right? He had 75 yards rushing, 53 yards receiving, also playing defense. And their kicker, to me, he's so vital to this offense. Kind of just, they lost so many skill guys at the running back spot, at the wide receiver spot. He's so important both in the run game and passing game, whether it's attacking off tackle and stuff like that. You're going to see a lot of stunts from inside. And Pleasantville does do outside stuff, but they love to send their linebackers internally. Getting out on the edge is going to be so important for Byram Hills. Also interested to see wide receivers that step up. Tyler Mascott, fast kid. There's somebody who, again, was impressed with his summer work, had a strong game last week. He could be somebody who can make some plays on the outside. If they start running the ball, the play action is going to open up. Defensively, obviously the number one thing, which has been very difficult to do, is contain Daniel Picard, right? It's not a one-man job. You constantly, it's literally a heavyweight fight. Every round, you have to contain him. You cannot allow him to get those big haymaker shots on you, because all it takes is one open space to go 60 yards, right? He'll get a 10-yarder, but if you give up those big, long touchdowns, they are back-breaking. Those plays where you have him cornered, he makes 3-4 guys miss, takes it 50 yards, is really back-breaking to you. So the big thing is the edge defenders. They have to keep Daniel Picard in the tackle box, and they have to swarm to him. It's at all times. The number one thing would be, let somebody else beat us. Now, you want to execute and prevent those, but you can't go into this game and allowing Daniel Picard to go over 150 yards and a couple touchdowns, right? That's got to be the number one priority, to slow him down. And when he's out of wide receiver, you're going to be cocking your coverage over to him, right? So you got to win those one-on-one battles at the other spots, right? That's your way you're going to win this game. But I'm interested to see guys like Jack Quinn at the linebacker spot. He helped lead the way for this defense, but who are the other guys that are going to step up? When I look at the matchup, guys, the big thing for me I'm looking at is Byram Hill's pass attack versus this veteran Pleasantville defense, especially the defensive backs. Going to be so very interesting. But they made some big plays in the championship game for him, but also Byram Hill's made some big plays on the offense, passing the ball. It's going to be an interesting dynamic with that veteran cornerback of Byram Hills versus these veteran DBs. And my player to watch, Luke Weiler, both as a runner defensively from Byram Hills and also as a kicker. He's so important. He can pin you down deep. He can score points when drive stall. He's going to be so vital if they're going to pull off this win. He's going to have a big game on each phase of the game. All right, guys, that was our previews. Now we're going to do our game picks, and it's so important for me. I know Mars is not here, so can't joke around with him, but we like to have a good time. We like to pick these games. I take these picks very serious. My goals are always to be over 75% by the time the end is, and I really want to hit over 80, right? So I'm really pushing myself. I always like to see what Low Hud's picking as well, so compete a little bit against Mars, compete a little bit against them, all in good fun. But let's dive into the game picks. First one up, I'm going to be bouncing around to different leagues, but let's talk about Edgemont at Pearl River. Both 0-0. They haven't played each other since before 2004. Since 2004, and when Pearl River won. And with Edgemont, listen, I think they got to rely on some of the veteran guys up front. They're bringing back 3 out of their 5 offensive linemen, led by guys like Will Barlow. And I think running the ball is going to be huge when they have to replace their quarterback. So Joey Sato is going to be so important. Can that open things up for them in the passing game with a younger quarterback coming in? Did get some reps last year, but with a younger quarterback coming in, trying to get comfortable, throwing it over the top to guys like David Barlow is going to be so important for Edgemont. But when you look at Pearl River, They also have to replace a lot on that offensive line, but the skill is there. They have their quarterback Whalen, who showed a lot of improvement over the summer. Very excited about him. You have your running back Espinal, who's a downhill physical runner for them. Can they attack kind of this smaller Edgemont defense? And their wide receiver McLaughlin, who's a very dangerous guy in the slot, creates a lot of separation, a lot of underneath routes. Interested to see how Pro River attacks Edgemont defensively. Number one thing's got to be stopping the run. I do think they do enough. I think they control the ball offensively. I'm going with Pro River in this one to win. Let's go talk about the next C matchup. Big rivalry, Woodland 0-0 at Dobbs Ferry, who's 0-0. Dobbs Ferry is 12-4 in their last 16 games versus Woodland. They've won 8 straight. Woodlands, the biggest thing is when you're playing Dobbs Ferry, your ability to stop the run. Can you handle the physicality of the offensive line of Dobbs Ferry is going to be so important. So a guy like Jay Castillo, is going to be so big as a defensive end and edge guy. Can you stop the run, especially a lot of these off tackle and then some of these outside runs? So it's going to be so important to see there. For Dobbs Ferry, again, you're replacing a stud back and stud halfback. You do have to replace some of the skill guys. A bunch of the offensive linemen are coming back. Interested to see guys like Kevin Hartnett, who has made some big-time plays for them at the quarterback spot. He's coming back for his junior year. You return 3 out of 5 offensive linemen. So to me, up front, has kind of been established, although they have replaced 2 starters. The backs are the big question mark for Dobbs Ferry. You know they love to run the ball, and then play action out of that is going to be so important. So expect to see a lot of quarterback runs, in my opinion. Defensively, bringing back a lot of guys. 7 of 11 guys coming back. They got guys at each level, led by their defensive back in Lewis. I think defense leads the way for Dobbs Ferry here. I'm going with Dobbs Ferry with the win. Let's do a Hudson Valley Football League game. Walter Pan is 0-1 at Portchester, who's 0-1. This is a big Hudson Valley Football League game right here. My big question mark to me is quarterback Carlucci. He hurt his hamstring last week. He's probably the best player in the Hudson Valley Football League. If he's not playing, it changes this game completely, right? So he pulled his hamstrings. Hamstrings usually don't heal in 1 week, right? So is he playing? Is he not playing? Quarterback Tetro stepped in. He was a back for them, had to step in at quarterback, had a passing touchdown last week. Chisholm had the receiving touchdown. They're really going to rely on this defense to try to step up. You have to slow down Portchester on the offense, running the football for them to have a chance. They got to keep this a low-scoring game. Last week, Portchester, they lost 41-8 versus Tucko. Way too many turnovers. If they can protect the football better, I think they can move the ball more efficiently and score some more points. But turnovers were huge last week for them. I actually think they protect the ball a little bit more, especially with the question mark of not knowing the status of Carlucci. I'm going to go with Portchester to win this game at home. I think they run the ball a little bit better, they protect the ball a little bit better, and they make enough plays to win this game. Let's talk about another one. Albertus Magnus, which is part of the Independent League, who's 0-1, is at Putnam Valley, who's 1-0. And I'll focus in on Putt Valley, right? So to me, offensively, they showed they could beat you multiple ways, right? Meister had a couple touchdowns. Glenn had over 100 total yards and touchdowns. There's a dynamic duo right there, but there's other guys who can make plays for you. And really, the establishment is on both sides of the offense and defensive line for Putt Valley. They were impressive last week. This week, again, going up, I think they can make a statement right here. So this defensive line, I think, is going to cause a lot of havoc for Magnus. They got shut out last week. They're trying to get their offense in a rhythm. It's going to be tough sledding this time around as well. Look for Putt Valley to win this game. I'm choosing them in this matchup. All right, let's talk about another Hudson Valley Football League game. Spring Valley 0-0 at Peekskill 0-0. And I tell you what, keep an eye on this one. Peekskill is going to be much more competitive this year than last year, in my opinion. But look at Spring Valley. Carl Augusti, I think, could have a huge game. He's that utility player, play running back, play wide receiver. He's one of the fastest guys in the league. Expect him to call his name a lot this game. And their quarterback, Bess Liam, I'm interested to see this young man play. They're replacing a quarterback. They had to replace a bunch of guys here, including one of their stud running backs. So how did this offense mold together? But what I know is defensively, they're going to be super aggressive, bring a lot of pressure. So quarterback on Peekskill better be ready for a lot of pressure in his face. And when I look at Peekskill, I mentioned, I think they're going to be much more competitive. They're bringing back all 5 offensive linemen, guys like Andre Gonzalez, Nazir Johnson. These are guys that are going to have to make some big plays up front for them. A lot of pressure. You got to communicate well. You got to get the ball out of your hand very quickly. Armani Brown is another guy. Coach was very excited about him, about a transfer coming in. Can make some big plays here. Don't be surprised if this game is close for most of the game. But I'm going to go with Spring Valley in a close one to win at Peekskill. Let's talk about a B matchup now. Hen Hud 0-0 at Croton Harmon, who's 0-0. Very interesting dynamic here. We got a new coach and Coach Coyle for Hen Hud, and they're playing Croton Harmon, who was coached by John Catano, which was the former coach of Hen Hud, which was a longtime coach for Croton Harmon. So this is a really interesting outside of the football field dynamic. But when I look at Hen Hud, again, they're trying to rebuild the culture here. But there are some guys here I think that could make this kind of culture change and program change move pretty quickly, and that's up front with guys like Mason Dietz, who's a big guy, physical guy, Frank's finest offensive lineman. You got Brandon Sumter, who is a very raw but big, strong. Look for the trenches to be huge in this game. They're two big parts of it. And Nico Baslaga, and I apologize if I screwed your name up, but I'm interested in Coach raved about his toughness, his no fear. He's going to be somebody who I think is going to be such a grinder for this team. He's going to be important for them to win football games this upcoming season. And looking at Croton Harmon, guys up front, this is going to be a nice dynamic with some of the size that Hen Hud has and some of the scrappiness that Croton Harmon has. And Aiden Nikic, Jack Urich. These guys on the both offensive line and defensive line facing off against probably a bigger Hen Hud unit. I find interesting. But Ben Reed, can he get going? He's such another important guy outside of their quarterback and Jacob Jones. He's a guy who's going to have to be huge for them, especially with, again, the emphasis on running the football is going to be huge. And obviously defensively, I mentioned Jacob Jones, love his ability to play quarterback, play linebacker, real tough, gritty, stopping. Again, Hen Hud's going to be in the spread. You need guys who can run. Jacob Jones is at the linebacker spot, one of the biggest playmakers for them. This is another very close game, in my opinion. I think being at home is huge for Croton Harmon. I'm going with Croton Harmon here. Again, I think they have more established veterans coming back. Hen Hud is going to be tough. They're going to try to spread you out. I think you're still going to see some of that grittiness from Hen Hud, but Croton Harmon is going to make enough plays with some of their veterans that Hen Hud can't capitalize on. I'm going with Croton Harmon. Let's go to another Hudson Valley Football League game. Tappan Zee 0-0 at Ramapo, who's 0-0. And I tell you what, Tappan Zee, listen, the big question mark for me on both these units is on the offensive and defensive lines, right? They have to replace some guys, but I think they're going to have the skill guys on both sides, going to make for a very interesting game. And on Tappan Zee's side's offensive, they want to spread the ball around, right? They had two stud running backs last year. The coach talked about emphasizing about kind of spreading the ball out a little bit more, but I think they have two guys who can run the ball pretty well this year as well, in O'Hara and Riley. So interested, keep an eye on those two guys. If the passing game doesn't get going early, look for them to focus on getting the ball and both running and passing. So keep those names on those two guys. And when I look at Ramapo, speed is the big thing. They're going to have a lot of speed. They're going to be, I think, one of the faster teams in the Hudson Valley Football League. Jaden Michele is a guy that Coach raved about. Very talented skill guy. But the running backs behind it, if Ramapo can establish the run game, establish up front, they can actually get a run game with guys like Jose Perez and Malik Willis. So to me, they have some big, strong guys. Definitely have some fast guys at the receiver spot. Quarterback position, offensive line is going to be so important for them. Defensively, again, stopping the run is going to be so big. I think the DBs on Ramapo could be very strong. I think it's a strong core for them. The question is going to win this. I think Tappan Zee does win this. I think, again, love the speed that Ramapo has. Tappan Zee, I think, is going to be a little bit bigger up front. I think they're going to kind of grind this game out as they establish their quarterbacks, as they establish the passing games, and I think Tappan Zee is going to make just enough plays to win this one. I'm going Tappan Zee. All right, guys, let's go to another B matchup. Another interesting one for me, the Briarcliff Hamilton football program, 0-1 at Irvington, who's 0-1. And last week, it was a tough loss for Briarcliff against Byram Hills. I think where they're really going to have to, again, step up is on that offensive line, which they did bring back 3 of their 5 starters from last year, and that's where they get kind of the other skill position, which they lost a bunch of the skill guys established. They got to rely on those big men up front to try to move bodies, and it's going to be so important for them to try to run the football, give some balance, protect the quarterback. So look for the reliance on that offensive line, and even on the defensive line, the same guys kind of playing both ways. Up front, they got to win this matchup, right? That's going to be huge for them to have an opportunity to win, is to win in the trenches. And when you look at Irvington, again, if you're missing your stud running back in Ken, who I didn't think played last week, I saw him on the sideline. But they did make a couple big plays, and that was they had a long passing touchdown. They made some nice efficient throws. They also had a long run last week for a touchdown. I think Alex Hempstead is the one who received the touchdown, but again, getting the numbers correctly, a little bit difficult when I don't have an Irvington roster, unfortunately. But they did make some plays offensively. Now, defensively, they got to prevent the big plays. They gave up way too many last week against the Briarcliff Hamilton football program. If they start giving up these big chunk plays, they're going to be in a world of hurt. And slowing down the run game is huge. They've really struggled against that last week. Stopping the run game is going to be so important. This, to me, feels like another very close game. And when these games are so close like this, and again, without knowing the status of Ken, I will go with Irvington. If he plays, I feel a little bit more comfortable about this. But Irvington, I think, makes enough plays at home to win this game. They also have some size up front, which I like. And again, I'm going to go with Irvington. Let's go to a B matchup. This is, again, some really interesting matchups here. Sleepy Hollow 1-0 at Nanuet, who's 0-0. And you look at Sleepy Hollow, this is another team that can make some noise on the B League. I was impressed with their victory last week. They ran the ball extremely well, over 300 yards rushing. Who needs to pass when you can run the ball that well? And it's led by their two guys. And Braden Richardson had 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Bowen, who had 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. So those are the stars of the show. The offensive line did a really good job of moving bodies. But now you're going to be playing a much more physical Nanuet defense. They're not huge, but they are physical and they will get after you. So interested to see how they run the ball against them. Do they have to rely on the passing game a little bit more? But these have 2 stud guys who can really burn you defensively, and I think they're going to rely on them again this upcoming week. But when I look at Nanuet defensively, it's going to have to start defensively because, again, you lose a guy like Moran, who is a stud for them as the running back spot. Who becomes that next guy who can run the football consistently? And can the quarterback position play at a high level consistently? Is going to be so big. They're going to try to shorten this game. I think these two teams are going to try to run the football. Clock is going to be going away. So whoever can hit some big plays. But defensively for Nanuet, to me, I think they can swarm to the football. They bring back a couple of very active linebackers. They got O'Sullivan, who is a defensive end, who was very good for them last year. Can this offensive line, who is scrappy, not huge, can they hold up against Sleepy Hollow's size? This one is another close one to me, but I'm going to go with Nanuet. I think their physicality, I think their aggressiveness, I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, and I think Nanuet makes just enough plays, controlling the clock, to win this one. I'm going with Nanuet. All right, let's talk about another B matchup. Hastings 0-1 at Rhinebeck, who's 0-1. B matchup here. When I looked at Hastings, Keith Capuano is a guy who clearly, on the football field, he's one of the best in the class. He was all over the field last week, even though they lost pretty big, but he made a bunch of big plays for them, and he's going to be huge in this game for Hastings to win this one. And when I look at Rhinebeck, turnovers absolutely killed them last week. Look for the quarterback Merkel to also be playing a high level. So this is going to be another back-and-forth game to me, but I think Keith Capuano being the X factor here, both as a returner and as a receiver, he's going to make some big plays on the offensive side of the ball. Don't be surprised he has a couple touchdowns on this one. I'm going to go with Hastings to win on the road. All right, let's now pick the games that we previewed earlier. First one up, Ardsley 1-0 at Nyack, who's 0-0. This is another really interesting game here. Nyack could be a team that I think gets better as the season goes along. I think they can make some noise in the B class, but establishing the offensive and defensive front in the beginning, I think will be a little bit slow for them. I'm going to go with Ardsley. They ran the ball very well last week. I think they will have good success running the ball, which will open up play action. Nyack has a lot of talent, a lot of speed, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get going. They didn't play a game last week. I'm going to go with Ardsley to win on the road in a close one. Let's go to the next one. CD matchup, Tucko 1-0 at Bronxville 1-0. Bronxville, I think, is 12-1 versus Tucko in their last meetings. Bronxville's size, again, I like the depth. I like the toughness that Tucko plays with. Super efficient offensively last week, but I think Bronxville's going to generate some pressure here, and they're going to move the ball up front. It's going to be a clash between the fronts of this Tucko and Bronxville offense and defensive lines. Really going to love to see it, but I do think Bronxville makes enough plays in the passing game that are going to overcompensate that physicality up front. Off the play action, I think Bronxville wins. They're at home, so think about that as well. On Bronxville's history versus Tucko, I'm going to go with Bronxville to win this game. All right, let's go to the next one. B matchup, Lakeland 1-0 at Rye 0-1. Can Rye rebound? Can Lakeland establish itself as one of the best in B? That's the big question coming into this game. I think Lakeland has the tools. I mentioned in our preview show, Lakeland can make some noise in B with some of the talent they have and some of the size they have up front. And I think this game will be close for a period of time, but I'm going to go with Rye. I think Rye is going to bounce back in this one. I think they're going to run the ball a little bit better, keep the ball out of Grady Leonard's hands for a little bit longer than he normally likes. And that's how I think Rye gets back on track, being a little bit more balanced. And I want to see this offensive and defensive lines of Rye really step up this week after what they had a bit of a struggle last week. So I'm going to go with Rye this week, but Lakeland is a team that I think they're going to keep it close for a while, and Rye's going to pull away. Let's go to the C matchup. Valhalla 1-0 at Westlake, who's 0-0. Valhalla, very impressed with their ability to run the ball. Yeah, the voice sets account for 5 touchdowns last week. What happens this week? I think Westlake bringing back a lot of veterans on the defensive side of the ball. They do have to establish things on the offensive line. I think they're going to show some pretty good balance here. Westlake is going to win this game. Again, I think they're one of the best teams in C. And I'm not going to give my rankings because that's for our Patreon members, but I think Westlake is the better team right this moment. I know they didn't play a game last week. I think, again, Valhalla's got some good sides to them, but the speed factor is going to be the difference maker. Westlake wins this game. Finally, the game of the week. B matchup, Pleasantville 0-0 at Byram Hills, who's 1-0. Can Byram Hills get revenge here is going to be so big. Again, they're at home. They played last week, had a very impressive game. Pleasantville did not play. They had to go to a scrimmage. How do they, how do they fare in this first week this year? This is going to be a very interesting matchup to me. I think, don't be surprised if Byram Hill leads this game for a long period of time, but I'm going to go with Pleasantville to win towards the end, and this is my reasoning. Pleasantville, again, has to establish stuff on the offensive and defensive line. They had to replace a bunch of guys up front. Byram Hill's already played a game. I think they're a little bit more ahead of the curve right now. They have a veteran quarterback. I think they're going to be making some plays early. This could be a low-scoring game for a while, but Pleasantville, I think, starts to get going. You're going to see a big Daniel Picard play, and you're going to see their quarterback, Aiden Picard, make a couple clutch moment plays towards the end of the game. I think this is going to be another one of those classic close ones with Byram Hill. We've seen the last couple matchups, and Pleasantville is going to pull away at the end. I'm going to go with Pleasantville. All right, everyone, that was our show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Always appreciate your support. Good luck to the teams for the rest of the season, and we'll see you all very soon.